So this entire Venezuelan coup thing is not a new occurrence. It's something that's been happening since at least the 70s, maybe even a little bit earlier than that, but we're going to start at the 70s and try to work our way up. This is about 5 hours of information, and a lot of it I did get from Blackstone Intelligence, so big props to him. You want to subscribe to him, head to his channel. He has the highest regards in my opinion because the man knows his shit and does the work. He gets it done. But I'm going to try to condense this down into like 30 minutes or less. So let's condense down 5 or 6 hours of information into 30 minutes. Why did this coup start to begin with? Well, again, like I said, it goes all the way back to the 70s, and all roads tend to lead to Israel or the Zionist. So we got OPEC. OPEC was a organization of oil companies that were make themselves independent from like the big Standard Oil, Rockefeller oil companies, and they were trying to protect themselves, protect their own assets. A lot of these countries were the Middle Eastern countries such as Iraq, Syria, Iran, etc. But that also included Venezuela because they were the largest suppliers of oil at one point in time in the world, and they still are one of the largest suppliers of oil as of right now. So being a part of OPEC, back when the Arab-Israeli wars were going on and the US was supporting them during these Arab-Israeli wars, OPEC said, hold on a second, your little Israel is coming at us, trying to take our land, such as Egypt, Iraq, Syria. They were just taking swaths of land and enforcing their will. So OPEC said, no. We're going to organize a embargo of oil towards the United States and Israel and anybody that's supporting these wars. So what happens? The embargo happened. And the United States at the time, getting most of their oil from Venezuela, all of a sudden loses major sources of gasoline for cars and other vehicles and other uses as well, and the price of oil skyrockets to, I think it was less than $7 a barrel, and it shot up to 25. I might have the dates mixed up on that, but they did skyrocket, and this again was a product of the embargo because of the wars in Israel. Again, it was several countries who again nationalized their oil and natural resources and joined groups such as OPEC to counter the US and Israeli imperialism at the time. It wasn't just oil that they were doing this, they were also nationalizing their banks and separating themselves from the IMF or the World Bank, which is essentially the New World Order in a nutshell. They financially wreck you and then you're enslaved to them. You're enslaved to the bankers. So in the banking situation, you had, again, these countries such as Syria, Iraq, Iran, nationalizing their banking to kind of get away from all these different privatized groups that went in through the International Monetary Fund or other foreign-backed groups as well. So moving on from there, Venezuela nationalized their oil, creating the company PDVSA. And Venezuela became very, very wealthy with PDVSA, even buying up American companies such as Citgo and others that really did place them on a pedestal in the world stage. And the United States and Israel, the whole Zionist world order, could not stand this. So what happens? Either by design or by chance, because I haven't really went into full depth and how the oil prices collapsed. There was a oil glut that dropped world prices because these companies were selling more oil and flooding the market and lowering the prices of gas. I don't know if it was intentional or if there was some behind the scenes, but all I know is that they were flooding the markets and the price of oil collapsed. It was called the oil glut of the 80s. And as you can see on this chart, the boom from when OPEC and these companies cut off the United States and other countries, the price of oil shot up. And then as soon as that supply and demand effect happened, it shot all the way down. So what happened is all these countries that were profiting and becoming rich from high prices of oil, all of a sudden, now they're in the hole and they need some way to pay off different investments, and essentially they needed loans. So what happened? Places like Venezuela, they reached out to the IMF. They called up the devil, said, hey, we need some money. So that put Venezuela in debt to the World Bank. So what happens there? With Venezuela in debt to the World Bank, the IMF, Venezuela went into poverty, and the United States and these other companies are coming in trying to take advantage of the situation. They have their people in place, even people like Hugo Chavez, who was doing what the United States wants, following their orders, very similar to Saddam Hussein, and they just wanted to keep that going. So they were not opposed to Hugo Chavez when he ran for president in 1998, which he won office. And the United States like, hey, we're not going to worry about it. We'll just see what happens. We don't care. But Hugo Chavez, unlike almost every other political leader around the world, there are a few exceptions, started fulfilling his campaign promises. One of the first things he did was went in and changed the Constitution. Now, he didn't just write up a new Constitution himself and said, here, this is what you got to follow. No, he went publicly, had people vote for 350 new articles that passed with over 70% of the votes. And to this day, it is one of the greatest examples of a democratic constitution that actually favored the people more than the leeching government did. The United States, like, holy shit, I thought this guy was on our side, just like the United States was like, I thought Saddam Hussein was on our side. So not only did Hugo Chavez do that, he instantly took money from the nationalized PDVSA and started paying back the loans to the IMF. He said, no, we're not going to be in debt. I'm going to pay it off. And he paid it off 5 years in advance of what it was supposed to be paid off. So the IMF is missing out on all this money and chains that it had around the Venezuelan people. They're like, holy crap, slow it down. Need to fix this right now. So, what happens? The United States organizes a coup to overthrow Hugo Chavez. Now, using people such as Elliot Abrams, remember that name, coming in and training up oppositions. We know this happened through leaked documents and public admissions now, especially the Venezuelan counterintelligence groups intercepting opposition communications, knew that Washington was behind this. So the coup succeeded, but it only succeeded for 48 hours. And then the people that were loyal to Hugo Chavez, because not only did he give a public constitution that the people agreed to, he then had the people re-vote for him once that constitution was in place, and he won with more passing votes than he did the first time. And just keep in mind that these votes were under international monitoring, so it wasn't like he was just putting fake votes in there and voting for himself. So the people, at least the majority of the people, actually supported Hugo Chavez, and they counter-couped and then placed Hugo Chavez back into power in less than 48 hours. Then, after that, Hugo Chavez still in power, Washington gritting their teeth and not wanting to give up on this, especially when Hugo Chavez, not only did he pay off the IMF, he kicked the IMF out of Venezuela in 2007. Said, no more, get out. We don't want you. We're not enslaved to you. So what does the United States do then? Well, they start building up more opposition to try to do another coup in Venezuela. They really want this man out of power. So using OPFOR-based groups such as Canvas, which are, again, CIA groups. They're CIA funded. You can see their private emails between each other here and other places on the internet, and you will just see how corrupt it is. They use US aid, just like the White Helmets, to raise up fake opposition groups to then astroturf discontent, create riots, create scenarios to try to force and pressure Hugo Chavez and whoever they're trying to do this to out of power. This is where Juan Guaido comes into the picture. Juan Guaido, who I'm sure you've heard about recently, and I'll get more to that in a minute, was a product of this Canvas CIA group. He was completely and utterly trained, sent off to different countries and went to CIA workshops and DRAT4, OPFOR workshops, paid for by Canvas, paid for by USAID, and trained to be an extremist / opposition leader. Now, through his tenure as this opposition leader, he led protests, violent protests that led to the deaths of pro-government protesters that were counter-protesting, set buildings on fire, created all kinds of havoc, very similar to what happened in Ukraine in Euromaidan, which we know was US-backed as well. And again, not grassroots, because this man was a part of a political party that had less than 14% of the votes in a Congress. He was not anything special. It was less than 14%. And it was on a rotating leadership. That means that he didn't necessarily even win his position, but they rotated it to prevent people from arguing about who won because of the hostile situation created by this U.S. intervention. Now, alongside inciting violence and creating this false opposition, now led up by Guaido, they also started instituting sanctions. But before that happened, Hugo Chavez passed away. And he kind of passed away under mysterious circumstances. They said it was cancer, but it kind of came on all of a sudden. And with the circumstances, it makes you wonder, but we don't have proof to that, so we'll just keep that locked away for now. Now back to the USAID. Keep in mind that USAID, just in 2018 alone, we were giving them almost $100 million to opposition groups, just like we were doing in Syria with the White Helmets, which we know are a part of Al-Qaeda, radical extremist groups. And what are these in Venezuela? Radical extremist groups that are creating violence, killing people, killing the government and civilians, setting people on fire. There are examples of all of that, and the United States is funding them. But anyway, and here's more articles there. We started sanctioning Venezuela. We already had sanctions, but this is where it got bad. Obama, in 2015, instituted sanctions that targeted the government and attempted to shut them down to the outside world. This is where we start having the shortages of all types of government-instituted necessities, food, water, gas, etc. It was all being sanctioned, so you're cutting off the people to all these necessities, so they then in turn try to turn against their government. This is what you do. This is sanctions. They squeeze the people, not the actual governments. It is the people that suffer. Now, mainstream media is not going to tell you that, but that's the truth. They start to choke off the people, and they'll say, oh, it's all socialism's fault. Oh, it's all this it's all this evil dictator's fault. But in reality, it's because the United States is cutting them off because they're not getting what they want. So they're going to have to force the people to do it for them by killing them slowly. You remember the video of the U.S. Secretary, I believe, saying, was 500,000 children dying in Iraq worth it? And that was from U.S. sanctions, and she said, yes, it was worth it. So this is how these people operate. They will kill millions of people to get what they want. So again, during this time, during and after the sanctions, we still have Guaido-backed groups, CIA-backed groups, funded by the United States, creating this havoc, creating these violent protests, trying to put more and more pressure on the government to capitulate, just like they did in Ukraine, just like they tried to do in Syria, just like they did in Iraq, etc. It is the same old script. So we fast forward, we had Donald Trump sign more sanctions that were even more grotesque and even targeting their gold. So again, attacking all their natural resources, anything that can be nationalized or kept away from the United States, anything the United States can't get its hands on, like the oil, and it sits there and it takes it away from them as well. And if you don't believe me that the reason why the United States is doing this is because of the oil, again, that's the main reason it started to begin with. Just listen to John Bolton.
We're looking at the oil assets. That's the single most important income stream to the government of Venezuela. We're looking at what to do to that. We want everybody to know we're looking at all this very seriously. We don't want any American businesses or investors caught by surprise. They can see what President Trump did yesterday. We're following through on it.
So if you think of a company like Citgo, which is owned by PDVSA, which is the state-run oil company there in Venezuela, we have a lot of those Citgo assets right here in the U.S. Is that something, for example, sir, that you're looking at?
Yeah, well, we're in conversation with major American companies now that are either in Venezuela or, in the case of Citgo, here in the United States. I think we're trying to get to the same end result here. You know, Venezuela is one of the three countries I call the troika of tyranny. It'll make a big difference to the United States economically if we could have American oil companies really invest in and produce the oil capabilities in Venezuela. It'd be good for the people of Venezuela. It'd be good for the people of the United States. We both have a lot at stake here, making this come out the right way.
So they were just saying it right to our face. They want the oil. They want the oil, just like Donald Trump says, we'll go in Syria and we'll take the oil. That's the reason he wanted to stay in Syria. That's the reason why the Kurds, which are being proxied by the United States, are still in eastern Syria, right there in the concentration of Syria's oil. So, with the sanctions, to force the people to try to survive, force them into opposition, force them against their own government, with the United States openly admitting they just want Venezuela's oil, they want their assets. CIA asset Juan Guaido declared himself president of Venezuela. And again, right away he gained support from Brazil, he gained support from the United States, he gained support from Israel. 10 European countries as well recognized Guaido as the Venezuelan leader. I mean, heck, if you even go look at Wikipedia right now, Wikipedia says the Bolivian Republic of Venezuela. Who is the president of that? Juan Guaido. So it couldn't be more obvious what the end goal is. So after he self-declarates himself with U.S. blessing, and all these countries start recognizing someone that just stated they're the president. He didn't win the election. He's not even popular despite his party's name, Popular Will, just says, hey, I'm the leader, which is just about as dictatorial as it gets. United States, Donald Trump appoints Elliot Abrams as the special envoy for Venezuela. Remember that name, Elliot Abrams? One of the masterminds behind the 2002 coup? Is all of a sudden the new special envoy for Venezuela as soon as we're on the precipice of a bloody coup? Yes, bloody coup, because Donald Trump now says military option is on the table. Not only is supplying the opposition on the table, military option is on the table for Donald Trump. Just think of the implications of that. Just a few more days down the road from then, we had top Venezuelan general defecting, calling Guaido head of state. Now, something interesting, back in that 2002 coup, what came out in those same CIA documents is that the CIA was paying these military defectors and military generals back in 2002 $100,000 a piece to come out and defect, because it was not a popular choice. They were paying them hundreds of thousands of dollars to defect against their government. So what do we see here? A very similar situation. We have now a few military leaders. We even had some military men just about a week ago come out, and it turns out that despite them saying they just left the military and they're ready to fight against the evil dictator of Maduro, it turns out their uniform that they were wearing was like more than 10 years old. So they had long been out of the military. They have long been out of the military. They weren't active members of the military, and they're likely paid off as well. We don't have the proof for that yet, because this is happening right now. We're seeing a organized coup happening through our eyes, just like we saw one in Syria, and we have people defecting again. Now, this isn't widespread yet, but this is starting to shape up just like 2002. I even stated that on the community page there. So we have the Venezuelan army massing on the Colombian border. Now, the reason they are is because this is where the USAID is being shipped to. And when I say USAID, I'm talking about the physical things they're shipping there. They're probably going to be shipping guns, weapons, and other type of supplies. And if not guns and weapons, they're going to be shipping, say, like radios and ways they can keep communication with each other and set up a network, just like they did in Syria with ISIS-type groups and Al-Qaeda and the Free Syrian Army, and whatever you want to call it, because they were all the same, to orchestrate this coup. So Venezuela is hopping on the gun there, and they're sending their military to cut that off before it happens. And keep in mind that Brazil is supporting Guaido as well, which means they're supporting a U.S. puppet. Could Brazil take military action and support the United States as well? I'm sure the United States would rather use a Brazilian proxy before putting our own people on the ground, because it looks better that way. But everything is shaping up to look like another proxy war, just like in Syria, but right here in South America. One last thing, we have the possibility of China hopping in here and fighting on the other side of this proxy war, just like Russia did in Syria, coming in 2015 once things got out of hand, to prevent their ally and their major assets from being completely wasted, turn around and bomb the ever-loving shit out of U.S. proxies. So could we see China's turn to be a major player, because they did support Syria as well, but could we see them being a major player, sort of like Russia was in Syria? Got to keep in mind that over $50 billion has been put into Venezuelan oil by China, so that's not a small amount of money. So we could see all types of things heating up here. Now, I feel like we're up to date and we have a brief overview of the situation in Venezuela, and it will make it easier for me to jump in and give in more information and updates like I did in Syria and still do in Syria, so we can keep up to date with what's going on exactly. We want to talk about this as much as we can, make it public, let people know, share this video, get it out everywhere so they understand what's happening in Venezuela is more than just socialism. Yes, I had to look into that myself. Though I am staunchly against socialism, that is not the key factor here. The key factor is the United States. The key factor is the United States has been orchestrating coups and has been heavily involved in Venezuelan politics for years and years, because they want the oil. They want control of Venezuela's natural assets, because it is a big factor when it comes to the global playing field. And at the end of the day, if we sit back and we don't complain about this, or a country like China doesn't step in and prevent the United States from getting too antsy, who else is going to stop it? Nobody. It's up to us. We are literally the only resistance to these types of actions. We the people, we are the only ones that can pressure our governments into not doing unconstitutional, immoral things, because it's going to be bad. If a war breaks out in Venezuela, it's going to be worse than Syria. If you know anything about Vietnam, you know jungle warfare is horrid, and it will not sit well on my conscience if I don't say something as well. Now, you all know I couldn't do this without your support, so if you appreciate the work I do here and want to continue to see us grow, head on down to our Patreon in the links below and send us $1 or $2. We also have PayPal, Patreon, Bitcoin, Litecoin, so if you do want to support, it will help a great amount. Continue to keep your eyes open, and as always, this was Tyranny Unmasked.